For 6 years, the loneliest part of my week was 100 miles of dark I could have driven with my eyes shut. I'm writing it down because I need it out of my head and fixed to something that can't quietly rearrange itself overnight, the way other things in my life have started to. It's about the rest stop at mile marker 112, and it only holds together if I tell it slow. Fast, it sounds like a woman who needs sleep. Slow, the way it actually came on. You can feel the shape of the thing underneath. My name is Renata. Most people who talk to me on the radio just call me Ren, or else they call me by the name painted on my door, which is Junibug, because the truck came to me secondhand with that already lettered on the hood, and I never had the heart to scrape it off. I haul refrigerated freight out of the Halsey yards down to the river ports, produce mostly, sometimes cut flowers in the spring, and I run it at night because at night nobody wants anything from me. Between midnight and the first gray smear of morning, the world goes quiet and uncomplicated, and for a long stretch of my life that was the closest thing I had to peace. There's a road between the Halsey Valley and the ports that the dispatch maps just call the connector, but the drivers who run it call it the long dark, and they're not being dramatic. It's 104 miles with nothing on it. No towns, no gas, no all-night diners with their windows fogged gold. Just 2 lanes of patched asphalt threading through a basin of dead farmland and second-growth pine. The kind of country where the radio gives up and gives you static, and the static starts to sound like it has opinions. You go in at one end full of coffee, and you come out the other end emptied of every thought you walked in with, and in between there is exactly one place to stop. It sits at mile marker 112, set back off the southbound shoulder behind a screen of pines that somebody planted in a straight line a long time ago. A low brick rest area, the kind the state built in the 60s and mostly forgot. Flat roof, a covered walkway, 2 restrooms, a vestibule with vending machines and a water fountain and a bulletin board, and out front a little apron of parking with room for maybe 4 rigs and a scatter of cars. A single sodium lamp on a pole, the bulb gone the orange of a struck match. Picnic tables out back under a shelter, going soft and gray with rot. That's all it is. That's all it ever advertised itself to be. I started stopping there the first winter I ran the route, because 104 miles is a long time to hold a full bladder and an empty head, and the rest stop is the exact middle of nothing. It became a ritual the way little things do when you live most of your life alone in a cab. I'd pull in, set the brake, let Junibug's engine tick and cool while I walked the stiffness out of my legs. Use the restroom. Buy a coffee from the machine that does the powder and the hot water, which is a terrible coffee, and I loved it anyway. Stand under the sodium lamp for a few minutes and let the quiet press on my ears. Then back in the saddle, 52 more miles to the ports, the load delivered before the buyers were even awake. It was good. For a long time, it was just good. I should tell you about the time, because the time is where the first thread comes loose, and I didn't even notice I was pulling it. I am a person who runs early. It's a thing my mother put in me and dying didn't take back out. I leave Halsey when the load's strapped and sealed, and depending on the season and the traffic out of the yard that could be 10 at night or it could be midnight. A swing of 2, 3 hours easy. Some nights I'd hit the long dark sluggish and yawning. Other nights I'd come into it sharp, the coffee still doing its work. Different speeds, different weather, different amounts of getting stuck behind some farmer's flatbed doing 40 with no taillights. By every law of how driving works, I should have reached mile marker 112 at a different time every single night. I reached it at 3:14. I want to be careful here because when I say always I mean it the way you mean a thing you only understand looking back. At the time it was just a number I happened to catch on the dash, the way you catch a clock and it doesn't mean anything. Pull in, glance up, 3:14. Another night, 3:14. I'd leave Halsey at 11, I'd leave at 1, didn't matter. The dash said 3:14 when Junibug's headlights swept across that orange lamp. I noticed it the way you notice you always seem to look at the microwave when it says 12:34. A little wink from the universe. A coincidence with a sense of humor. I even said it out loud to the empty cab one night, Something like, right on time, Junibug, and laughed, and didn't think a thing more about it. The restroom is where the second thread is, and that one took me longer because it's smaller, and it's the kind of thing your brain files under nothing before you've even finished noticing it. I'd go in fluorescent light with one tube always strobing, the slow tick of it, white tile gone the color of weak tea, and I'd wash my hands, and I'd put them under the dryer, one of those old chrome ones with the button you push and the nozzle you twist. And the air would come out warm, not warming up. Warm already, from the first second, the way it only is if somebody used it a minute before you. There is never anybody there. That's the part I kept setting down and not looking at. 104 miles of nothing at 3 in the morning. 4 parking spots and mine the only thing in them. And the dryer is always already warm, like the room only just emptied of someone, like I keep missing them by the length of a held breath. Some nights I'd push the button and hold my hand in that warm rush and feel the back of my neck go tight, and tell myself the motor stays warm. That's all. The motor's just warm from the last trucker. Never mind that there's no last trucker. Never mind that the lot's been empty every time I've ever pulled in. I'd dry my hands and I'd leave, and the basin would still be ticking with that one bad tube behind me. Then there's the machine. The vending machines sit in the vestibule between the 2 restroom doors, 3 of them in a row, snacks, cold drinks, and the coffee unit I told you about, the one I loved. The coffee was 85 cents. I have put 85 cents into that machine more times than I could count, 3 quarters and a dime. The dime always lasts because I'm superstitious about it, my mother's habit again. And one night the machine gave me change. I hadn't asked for change. I'd put in my exact 85 and press the button for the black, no sugar. And while the cup dropped and the machine made its grinding, heartbroken sound, the coin return clacked, and there in the little chrome cup were 2 quarters and a nickel. 55 cents I had not put in and had not been owed. I stood there holding a bad coffee in one hand and somebody else's change in the other, and I told myself the machine glitched, machines glitch, and I put the coins in my coat pocket and I left. But it kept happening. Not every time. Just often enough that I started to feel it coming, a little clack of the coin return like the place clearing its throat. Sometimes a dime. Once a whole dollar in quarters, heavy and cold, more than the machine had any business giving back from money I'd never fed it. I started a habit I'm not proud of, which is that I kept the coins in the ashtray cup in Junibug's console. A growing little heap of money the rest stop had given me, and I didn't spend it, and I didn't tell anybody about it. And on the bad nights, I'd hold my hand over it at a stoplight in the ports like it might be warm too. You're going to ask why I kept stopping. I've asked myself. The honest answer is the answer to most of why I do anything, which is that I was lonely in a way that had stopped feeling like a feeling and started feeling like weather, a climate I lived in. My mother had been gone 2 years by then. There was a man before the trucks, and the trucks were partly how I got away from how that ended, and there hadn't been anyone since, not really, not in any way that waited up. I had a sister in another state who loved me by phone twice a year. I had Junibug and a root and a savings account I was filling for no reason I could have named. And I had this one small lit place in the middle of 100 miles of dark that seemed, in its strange way, glad to see me. The coffee, the warm air, the little gifts of change. When you have very little that reaches for you, you don't ask too hard about the thing that does. The bulletin board is by the door, and the map is on the bulletin board, and the map is the last thread and the one that, once I pulled it, took the whole thing down. It's a laminated map of the long dark and the 2 basins it connects, the kind of thing the state seals behind plastic and screws to a board and never updates. Faded to the colors of an old bruise, the highway a thick red line down the middle, the town's little black squares at the far ends, the rest area marked with a symbol like a picnic table scene from the side. And the dot. You know the dot. Every one of those maps has it, a fat red circle with a white center, and the words "you are" here in a font that hasn't been fashionable since before I was born. It sat right on the highway line at the picnic table symbol, where it should, telling you what you already knew, that you were exactly in the middle of nowhere. I am a person who reads everything when she's tired. Ingredient labels, fire exit diagrams, the little cards in elevators. So I'd looked at that map 100 times the way you look at a thing your eyes have nothing better to do with. And one night in the late spring, I looked at it, and the dot was not where it had been. I want to be fair about this because the first time I couldn't have sworn to it. It had moved off the highway line just a little, just the width of the dot itself, a finger's width on the map. Off the red line and onto the blank cream-colored space beside it, the space that on a real map would be the gravel apron, the pines, the dead field beyond. You are here in the field. I stood there and I argued myself out of it. Maps get bumped. The lamination warps in the heat and the print shifts. I never really looked. I just thought I did. I told myself all of that, walking back to the truck, and I half believed it, the way you half believe the thing that lets you go to sleep. But I'm a careful person, the kind of careful that comes from running heavy freight on bad roads, and careful people keep records. I have a logbook. Every driver does hours of service, where you stopped and when the law requires it and habit hardens it. And I have a phone. So the next time I stopped, I took a picture of the map. Just held the phone up under that strobing vestibule light and took a picture of the dot, off the line in the field, and I looked at the picture, and I looked at the map, and they matched, and I felt better and worse at the same time, because now it was real and now I'd have to keep looking. It kept moving, slowly, over weeks. I have the pictures still and I've laid them out in order and you can watch it walk. From the highway line into the field, that first finger's width, then a little further from the road. Then it changed direction, and this is the part where I stopped being able to breathe right when I thought about it, so I tried not to think about it. It stopped drifting out into the open country and started drifting back toward the picnic table symbol, toward the building. Each picture the dot a hair closer to the little drawn shape of the rest stop itself, like something crossing the lot in the dark, in no hurry at all, coming in. I started leaving without buying the coffee. I want you to understand what an admission that is. The coffee was the whole ritual, the warm middle of my night, and I started skipping it because I didn't want to stand in the vestibule next to the map any longer than I had to. I'd use the restroom fast, not looking at the dryer, hands wet against my jeans, and I'd cross to the door with my eyes down and my heart doing a thing it had no business doing in a place I'd loved for 6 years. And every time I crossed that vestibule, I felt the pull of the map at the edge of my sight like a lit window you can't help but glance into. And most nights I lost and I looked, and the dot was always a little further in than it had been. There was a clerk for a while. I should have led with him, except that he came and went so quietly in my memory that I keep forgetting he was ever there, and that forgetting turned out to matter. His name was Dell. There's a booth in the vestibule I'd always taken for a closed information kiosk, glass gone milky, and one night in early summer the light in it was on, and there was a man inside it, an older man with a gray cardigan and reading glasses pushed up into thin white hair, doing a crossword. I about jumped out of my boots. 6 years and that booth had never once been lit. He looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting me, which I told myself was just a friendly old man's way. And he said, "You're the Junibug, aren't you?" And I said I was. And he said, "I'd know that engine in my sleep. You keep good time. You keep good time." I laughed because what else do you do? And we talked for a few minutes about nothing. The road, the weather coming, and it was so ordinary and so warm that I nearly cried, which tells you more about that stretch of my life than I'd like. He was there the next few stops. He knew my coffee, black, no sugar, the dime last, and he'd have a comment ready, mild and dry about the freight or the moon. I told him things. That's the thing about a kind voice in a lonely place at 3 a.m. It opens you. I told him about my mother. I told him about the man before the trucks. I told him, one night, half joking and not joking at all, that this rest stop was the only place that ever seemed glad I'd shown up. And he set his pencil down and looked at me over those reading glasses and didn't laugh, and said, "Well, it's glad. It's been waiting on you a long while." And then he picked his pencil back up like he hadn't said anything, and I drove out into the dark with that sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone. I asked him once about the dot. I'd worked up to it for 3 stops. I said, real casual, "Hey Dell, that map by the door, the "you are" here on it, does that thing ever look off to you like it's not where it should be?" And the booth was empty. I mean that the way it sounds. I'd been talking to him not a minute before. I'd looked away to dig my dime out of my pocket. And when I looked back, the light in the booth was off and the glass was milky, and there was no one inside and no crossword on the little shelf and a fine gray dust on everything like the booth hadn't been opened in years. And the chair, through the cloudy glass, the chair was still rocking. Just barely. The slow last sway of a chair somebody's only this second stood up from. Warm, I'd have bet my truck. Warm like the dryer. I never saw Dell again. I'm not sure now that the order I remember him in is the real order. I'm not sure he came before the dot started moving or after. My own memory of that summer has the same warped lamination quality as everything else, like it's been sitting in the heat behind plastic, the print shifting. Here is where I have to tell you about the lost and found, and I've been putting it off the way I put off looking at the map, because it's the part that took the floor out from under me. There's a box. Of course there's a box. Every rest stop has one. It sat on a shelf inside the maintenance alcove, a cardboard banker's box gone soft at the corners, the kind of thing nobody's emptied since the building went up. I'd never had reason to look in it. But the night after Dell's chair was still rocking, I wasn't ready to drive yet. My hands weren't steady enough, and I was wandering the vestibule the way you pace a hospital waiting room, and I saw the box, and some animal part of me that already knew something walked me over to it and made me lift the lid. On top was a travel mug. Dented steel, a band of grippy blue rubber around the middle, a dark coffee ring crusted in the bottom. It was my mug. I don't mean it was like my mug. I mean it had the dent I'd put in mine 3 winters back, dropping it on the fuel island in Halsey. The exact dent. And the rubber band was worn pale on the same side. And when I turned it over, the bottom was scratched with the little star I'd scratched into mine with a key so I'd know it from the other drivers at the wash. My mug. Which was sitting, I knew for a fact, in the cup holder of my truck 40 feet away where it had been the whole drive, where I'd sipped from it not an hour before. Underneath the mug was a coat. My coat, a canvas barn coat with a torn cuff and a Halsey co-op patch I'd sewn on crooked myself, and a coat I was at that moment wearing, the same torn cuff brushing my wrist as I held its twin. Underneath the coat was a logbook. My logbook, my handwriting, my route, the dime-last superstition noted in the margins the way I note it. And I opened it, and the dates ran on past that night. Weeks ahead, months, a whole winter I hadn't driven yet, every line the same. Mile marker 112, arrived 3. 14 a.m., and then nothing after, no departure time, line after line after line with the arrival filled and the leaving blank. Page after page of arrivals and never once a leaving, in my own hand, in ink that was still, when I touched it, a little wet. I didn't dig further. I want that on the record as the one wise thing I did. I put the coat back, and I put the mug back, and I put the lid on the box, and I did not look for the thing I was already afraid was at the bottom of it. And I walked out of that vestibule without using the restroom, and without buying the coffee, and without looking at the map. And I got in my truck, and my hands were shaking so hard it took me 3 tries to turn the key. That was the night I understood the last thread, the one the brief of my own life had been quietly weaving the whole time, the one about how it gets harder to leave. Because it had been getting harder. I'd been calling it tiredness. Some nights I'd sit in the lot after, engine running, and find I'd lost 10 minutes, 15, just sitting, just looking at the orange lamp, not unhappy, not anything. The way you sit in a warm bath past when the water's gone tepid because getting out means cold air. I'd told myself it was fatigue, the route catching up to me. But it wasn't fatigue. It was the same pull I felt from the map, the lit window pull, and it got a little stronger every stop, and I finally understood why. The box. Every visit the place kept a little more of me. The mug, the coat, the logbook full of arrivals. It was gathering me up off the truck and onto its own soft-cornered shelf, piece by piece, and the more of me was already there inside that low brick building, the less of me was left in the cab to want to drive away. And that's the whole trick of it. That's the entire quiet machine of the place. It doesn't trap you. It doesn't have to. It just keeps enough of you that leaving starts to feel like leaving part of yourself behind in the warm, out in the cold. And you're so tired. And the coffee's 85 cents, and they give you change you never paid. And the chair's still rocking, and you keep such good time. And the dot, walking across the map toward the building, was me. Was the part of me that had already stopped driving. I'd been photographing myself coming in. I want to tell you I figured all this out cleanly, that I'm the sort of woman who sees the shape of the trap and steps out of it. I'm not. What I did was much smaller and much harder. The night after the box, I did not stop. I want you to understand what that cost, because it doesn't sound like anything. A person didn't pull into a rest stop. But I came down the long dark with my whole body leaning toward mile marker 112 like a compass leans north. And as the green sign slid up out of the dark, rest area 1 mile, I felt the pull go from a feeling to a hand, an actual pressure on the wheel, Junebug's nose drifting toward the off-ramp on her own. And I had to hold the wheel against it with both arms locked and my jaw aching, and I drove past. I drove past the pines and the off-ramp and the orange lamp burning back there behind the trees. And the dash, I swear to you, the dash read 3. 14 as I passed the marker even though I'd left Halsey at 1:45 and should have been there 40 minutes earlier. 3. 14 as I went by, like the place reached out and set its time on me in passing. And then the marker was behind me and the clock ticked over to 3. 15, the first 3. 15 I'd seen and I couldn't tell you how long. And I started to cry so hard, I had to slow down. I made the ports that night raw and shaking, and an hour later than the log said I should be. And I delivered my flowers, and I sat in the lot as the sky went gray, and I felt, for the first time in I don't know how long, the specific ache of being a person who is fully and only in one place. It hurt, being entirely yourself. When you've gotten used to leaving bits of yourself somewhere warm, hurts like circulation coming back into a sleeping hand. I'll take it. I have taken it every night since. I don't run the long dark anymore. I went to dispatch and I asked off the connector and they looked at me funny because it's a good route, an easy route. And I made up a thing about the road bothering my eyes at night, which isn't even a lie. And they put me on the valley loops instead. Shorter runs, more towns, more lit windows, more places that don't want anything from me except money for diesel, which it turns out is a thing you can miss wanting. I sleep days now in an apartment with too many lamps. I called my sister. I'm filling the savings account toward something now, a small house up near where she is, a thing to drive toward instead of through. But I kept the change. The little heap of coins in Junebug's ashtray cup, the quarters and dimes, and the one heavy dollar the machine gave back for money I never fed it. I don't know why I can't throw it out. Some nights at a stoplight, I still hold my hand over it, and I'll tell you the truth because that's the whole point of writing this down. It's warm. Faintly. Always. Money that's been somewhere warmer than my hand and never cools, sitting in my truck. The last little piece of the place I let ride along with me. And some nights I think that's all it took. That I never really left at all, that you can't. That the dot is still walking and I just stopped watching the map. Because here's the thing I can't put down, the thing that keeps me from saying it's over. A driver I know runs the long dark now, took my old route, good kid, keeps good time. And last week on the radio, just passing the hours, he mentioned the rest stop at 112, how he likes the coffee even though it's terrible, how there's this funny old map by the door. And I asked him, casual as I could make my voice, hey, that you are here dot on the map, where's it sitting these days? And there was a little pause, just static, the long, dark static that sounds like it has opinions. And then he laughed and said, that's the weird thing, it's not even on the road. It's off in the field, kind of. Like somebody stuck it in the wrong spot. And then he said, but you know, it's funny, I swear last time I looked it was a little closer to the building. Probably the heat warping the plastic. And I said, yeah, probably the heat. And I signed off. and I sat in my driveway under all my lamps with the engine off and my warm coins in the cup. And I thought about that dot crossing the lot toward the low brick building in no hurry at all, coming in. And I thought, that's not him it's walking toward. He's only just started stopping. It's got 6 years of me on its shelf and a winter of arrivals in my own wet ink, and it keeps such good time. And it is patient the way only a thing with nowhere to be is patient. I drove past once. I don't kid myself that once is the same as free. The dryer's still warm in there for somebody. I just work very hard, every single night, not to be the one who needs to dry her hands.